Blog Talk Radio.
Hello everyone, my name is Jerry Ciolino. Today is February 14th, 2010, the second broadcast of the Jerry Ciolino Show. Today we will talk about a recent Supreme Court ruling allowing corporations to spend as much as they want on political campaigns while still maintaining campaign finance restrictions on individuals. The South Carolina legislature's passage of a bill requiring subversive groups to register with the state government, and a fake petition banning the First Amendment by a Mr. Mark Dice. Anyway, folks, first a few words from me. The first broadcast, if any of you heard, was a complete disaster. Bottom line is, I just got nervous and choked. I apologize. It is my fault entirely. I should have done more preparation before the show. So I'm pulling a mulligan on this one, folks. Just give me another chance. I was simply not ready, and I made a complete ass out of myself. So I'd like to take this opportunity to start over and reintroduce myself to all of you and tell you what to expect from this show. Once again, my name is Jerry Ciolino. I'm 24 years old. I live in Vista, California, which is not far from San Diego. I work on the stock crew at a grocery store called Stater Brothers, and I've been taking classes at Palomar College, which is a local community college. If I can eventually manage to pass the minimum requirement for math and boost my GPA, I will transfer to my 4-year, which most likely be Cal State San Marcos. Now, as many of you have probably guessed from the description of the show on my profile, this is a political talk show. I didn't put all that much thought into the description, so I'll come up with one more appropriate later on. Now, this isn't going to be a partisan rant about how the root of all evil in the world rests with the Republicans or the Democrats, because, frankly, there's no point in that, as they are two sides of the same coin. But it's also not going to be a happy-go-lucky, feel-good, everyone sing kumbaya, phony, centrist show either. If you want to hear that nonsense, all you need to do is listen to any of President Obama's speeches. Now, this show is about liberty versus tyranny. That's right, liberty versus tyranny. Now, most of you are not willing to admit it, but the government is now abusing its power more than ever before. The size and scope of government is growing like a cancer. It is infecting everything around it. Bailouts, stimulus packages, so-called jobs bills, which are basically just more bailouts, have now become the rule as opposed to the exception. The national debt seems to have no end in sight, yet the out-of-control tax and spend big government ideology of both Democrats and Republicans does not waver. The illegitimate criminal cartel known as the Federal Reserve, which is as federal as the Federal Express, is printing more money out of thin air and bailing out more of its criminal buddies than ever before. President Obama and congressional Democrats are pushing for a national health care plan that would force the public to buy insurance or pay a $20,000 fine or go to jail. Lovely. Sure smells like freedom, doesn't it, folks? Every phone call, every email is being tracked and traced by the National Security Administration, or NSA as it is more commonly known, without warrants. Groups which disagree with the government, such as gun owners, libertarians, pro-lifers, and others, have been blacklisted under the MIAC Homeland Security Report, and I'm sure other similar reports, as, quote, domestic terrorists, without any regard as to whether or not they have committed any violent acts. Millions of Americans have been inconvenienced and humiliated by having their names placed on a secret do-not-fly list without probable cause. Airport searches are now more draconian than ever, as now travelers are not only subject to glorified gropings or pat-downs, but are now even forced to go into these body scanners that show so much detail of the body that they violate child pornography laws. Yes, folks, they violate child pornography laws, and guess what else? They can give you cancer. Yeah, the C word. People are still, despite President Obama's false promises, having their Fifth Amendment rights to due process violated by being held indefinitely, still being held indefinitely in what are in all but name gulags, that are forced to confess to crimes which they may or may not have committed through brutal methods of torture such as waterboarding. The unconstitutional undeclared wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and our inappropriate intervention into the affairs of other nations are proceeding with no end in sight. The government has engaged in and continues to engage in numerous conspiracies, with one of their personal favorites being false flag terrorist operations where they get a few patsies, have them carry out terrorist attacks and blame them on someone else for political gain. The Nazis, for example, did this by burning down the Reichstag Parliament building and blaming it on the communists so they could get sweeping new powers. And we all know how that turned out, folks. And our own government has done this by disguising a U.S. ship as a Vietnamese gunboat and having it attack another U.S. ship and deliberately falsifying documents in the Gulf of Tonkin resolution to make it look like an actual Vietnamese attack on a U.S. ship to escalate the Vietnam War. May seem like ancient history now, but, well, guess what? We're still doing this, folks. A planned false flag operation called Operation Northwoods, which would have been a series of terrorist attacks committed by the CIA on U.S. civilian and military targets and blamed on Cuba in order to start a war with that country, was stopped in its tracks because then President Kennedy, our last real president, didn't want to do it. And more recently, there's 9/11, where they took a few patsies with strong ties to the U.S. military and intelligence agencies and probably either tricked them into thinking they were participating in a drill or brainwashed them and had them crash the buildings into the World Trade Center towers and the Pentagon to make the official story look credible, while they had controlled demolitions actually bring the buildings down because they knew that jet fuel, as hot as it is not strong enough to melt construction-grade reinforced steel. You heard me right, folks. 9/11 was an inside job. I repeat, 9/11 was an inside job designed as an excuse to launch two unconstitutional, undeclared wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and take away our civil liberties and make us slaves in our own republic. If you haven't already, watch Alex Jones's Fall of the Republic, Endgame for Blueprint for Global Enslavement, 9/11, The Road to Tyranny, or Jason Bermas's Loose Change, or Conspiracy Theory with Jesse Ventura. And do your own research into these and other claims, and you'll find that the actual truth of the matter is far more disturbing than the propaganda the government and its Goebbels Juniors in the mainstream media are trying to feed you. My fellow Americans, I'm not going to mince words now or ever. This is fascism. Our government has been hijacked by tyrants, and the majority of the people have been brainwashed. It is our responsibility to wake up our fellow citizens so we can peaceably take back our government and bring these criminals to justice. Even the Tea Party movement has been compromised by neoconservative corporate whores like Sarah Palin and Glenn Beck. Now, before I go to my first story, I'm going to see if we have any calls here. Looks like none yet. But if you wish to call, my number is to call into the show is 646-371514. Once again, my number if you want to call into the show is 646-371514. There are no callers yet, so I am going to move on. Now it is time to get to the brass tacks, the first story of this broadcast. The Supreme Court has ruled recently in a 5-4 decision in the case of Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission that campaign finance laws violate the free speech rights of corporations